of Joe, who's currently having computer problems, who's the chair of this committee. I'm going to start with introductions and welcoming those who are listening in to us. My name is Pat Kimball, and I'm the chair of the Maine Recovery Council. And I'm going to turn it over to Grayson.
Sorry, having trouble unmuting myself there. My name is Grayson, and I am with the AG's office. And I don't know if I can pass it myself, but I'll pass it to Katrina.
Hi, I'm Katrina Bonish. I am also with the Attorney General's office, and I'm gonna just keep going down the line on my screen to Bruce.
Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Nodden, and I'm with the Maine Reentry Network, and I'll pass over to Maggie.
Hello, I'm Maggie McLaughlin. I'm representing one of the litigating subdivisions. I'm the Director of Health and Human Services for the City of Portland, and I will pass it to Amber.
Hi, my name is Amber. I am a MAT clinician in Northern Maine and an individual in long-term recovery. And I will pass it to Chastity.
Everyone, Chastity Toole. I am a person with lived experience of substance use and represent the harm reduction community. I'm a harm reduction consultant in rural Maine. And my camera will mostly stay off while I do note people don't need to see my concentration face.
Mary, can you go?
Sure thing. I'm Mary Coyne. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council. Let's see, I'll pass it over to Gordon.
I'm Gordon Smith, the state's director of opioid response in Governor Mills' office. Who's left?
Liz and Brendan.
Liz.
Hey all, my name's Liz Blackwell-Moore. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director for Public Health at Cumberland County. And I'll pass it lastly to you, Brendan.
Hi, everyone. Brendan O'Neill with the Attorney General's office.
Right, thank you. So I believe the agenda goes like this. There's a discussion on priorities. Then we'll have we'll talk about contract management. We'll talk about the unfunded applications. We'll talk about prevention and then other business. I believe, Mary, that's the agenda. Okay.
Yes, that is what I have. And I also just want to note I've just promoted Melissa Hackett to join as a panelist, so she will be joining momentarily.
I did meet with Joe at 1:30 and we discussed a slightly, I think, different agenda in terms of where the items are placed, but got to all of what you mentioned, and there might have been a couple of new things too. One of the first things he and I thought would be good to start with is a couple of the technical issues that we ought to explain before the council meeting on the 13th, but we didn't think they'd be very controversial. So I'm responsible for a couple of those. So let me start with that while we're trying to meet with Joe, Pat, if that's all right with you.
Joe is right back.
Okay, we're good. Joe, yes, introduce yourself. Joe. All we've done is introduce ourselves, Joe, and I was trying to explain to them the agenda that you had.
Okay, perfect. Have we done introductions? So sorry about that little technical.
Oh, you're the only one left. Everybody else introduced themselves.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, guys. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Everett. I'm the president and CEO of the Opportunity Alliance. I'm a member of the council, and I chair this wonderful committee. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Do you want me to dive in, Gordon, to the agenda, or do you feel like you got us covered? Or
well, all I told them was that you and I had a thought. Mary had an agenda. Pat had an agenda. You and I talked about an agenda. I think all the items are the same. The only question is in what order that we go. But I did tell him that you and I had talked about doing a couple of the technical things first, that get those out of the way because we didn't think they'd be particularly controversial, but needed to at least be explained. So that's just where I was starting. And I would start with the two planning contracts that I have to get the draft and amended motion for. If I could go ahead and explain that, shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 minutes, probably.
Okay, Perfect. Go ahead, and
All
then
right,
we can
so
keep going.
so I've taken primary responsibility to draft about 3 of the contracts, 2 of those being the old planning contracts that we had started with the contracts for detox beds in Franklin County and in Androscoggin County. I've got to take a couple minutes to take you through the history of this because otherwise Melissa, Maggie would have no idea of this history. So I believe I have the dates right. Grayson can correct me if I'm wrong, but uh, most of the story starts in December of 2023. About what is that, like 14 months ago, 13 months ago. And at that time, there felt to be we felt that there was an acute need for more detox beds. We were just coming out of the pandemic. We hadn't opened up the 30-bed facility at Milestone, and we were still really focusing in the treatment pillar on detox beds. So I had made a motion. It's possible that Courtney might have made one of the motions, but in any case, we succeeded that day in committing $1.5 million in Franklin County for up to it was probably up to 10 detox beds. And we did the same in Androscoggin County. We really felt that there was a need in that western area and in Androscoggin County. I don't want to, we've got so much to do in these 2 hours. I don't want to dwell on why these things occurred, but it became clear by the spring that the beds that we had weren't filling, and we were, and we'd also had a failure of an RFP in Washington County on the part of the state where we offered the same amount of money and then we 1.5 million to have some detox beds and then increase that to $2.4 million and no one would do it. So Mary and I actually then in the spring, maybe March, February, we sat down with Franklin County and said, we're a little concerned about this, and is anybody prepared to do, for $1.5 million to build a freestanding detox facility in Franklin County? It was clear that there was no party that was even contemplating doing that or interested in doing it at that point in time. So then we suggested, because we needed money for a facility that could give us detox beds quicker, in the town of Washington and Knox County at Tessa's house, which will open probably in March, we said, how about this? We feel we need that one. We need some of that money to open up some beds in central Maine, but they'll be in Knox County. And what would you think if we took $1.1 million of this money, used it for that facility where you'll still have some access there, and we'll leave you with $400,000 to do some planning and assessment on what your priorities really are in this county. If they're not detox beds, what would you like to do if you had $1.5 million? And that motion passed unanimously, as I recall. That amendment is clear. That motion is clear. 1.1 million redirected over to Tessa's house, $400,000 for planning and assessment. I've been working on that with a large coalition of organizations up there, led by the Healthy Community Coalition, the fiscal sponsor being Maine Health through the Franklin Memorial Hospital. The next thing that happened was that we didn't get any action on any interest on freestanding detox beds in Androscoggin County either. And we suddenly needed 1.1 million of that money to shore up Milestone. And Milestone, we're changing those 30 detox beds because to now a configuration of 12 detox beds that hopefully will be filled, and maybe 15 and 12 short-term residential beds. We did the same thing, went to Androscoggin County, said, will anybody do detox? No. how would you feel about $400,000 for a 2-year contract to plan, update your strategic plan and tell us what you'd like to do in that county. What are your priorities? And we're going to redirect $1.1 million of this money to Milestone. That motion passed unanimously, except that the motion was in error in that it said that we were going to use the $400,000 not to fund planning and assessment, but to do detox beds. That's just an error. And in drafting the contracts, I realized that. So on the 13th, I am preparing a motion that we can send you out in advance that will correct that error. And I'm going to, if people are supportive, I'm going to add to the motion the following. As they do their planning, and these are two strong coalitions, they should be able, I think, in the 18 months to 2 years of these contracts, to not only do a prioritization and plan, they could really use some of those funds to start some projects. And they'd very much like to do that. So as long as it doesn't exceed $400,000, I've suggested, well, why don't you use $200,000 to do your planning and save $200,000 as a placeholder to begin a project that's going to benefit your county, and you'll just have to tell us, when you've got your project identified, and you'll have to get us to approve that project. But we'll send you two checks, one for $200,000 to get started, one $200,000 to do a project. So that's the motion I'm going to make. We'd like to get, I think it would be great if you're willing to support it at the grants and programs committee level. Then it comes into the full council with a little more weight. Thank you.
And Gordon, are you asking that we make a motion to support it, or what's your request?
Yeah, I think we could almost do it by consensus and not necessarily a motion, because we're just making a recommendation that the motion I've just described has the approval of the grants and programs committee, because it is an amendment to a grant, and helps us move those contracts along. So I think now that I've explained it, happy to answer any questions, particularly for those of you who this is a completely new story. That would include Amber, Melissa, and Maggie. But there really is a lot behind it. Liz?
Go ahead, Liz.
I agree with the story that you've told. I struggle with the just random $200,000 do a project when there are projects across the county that have come to us that are ready to go. I guess I would prefer they come to us with a project and then we decide on that and whether we want to fund that, instead of saying we will fund a project. I understand the concept. I think I struggle with process around funding things here in general. And so this feels like it just kind of happened. And you did tell the story of how it happened, but I feel like it just kind of stuff just happens. And I would just, if we say yes to this, in the meantime, can we do some work on process of how we come up with things that were changed along the way, or we just have a new list of a new project that's coming in front of this committee today that didn't even get a high vote that we're looking at again, you just popped it in the conversation at the end of the last meeting, Gordon. I'm uncomfortable with some of this process. So
Well, yeah, I'm sympathetic to that view, Liz. I would say that if I wasn't out doing this stuff, I don't know who would be. And we need to start spending money. I mean, even the federal order today by Trump not to send any federal money to anybody, we're going to have even more pressure on us. And we are sitting on a lot of money. And we have to be nimble, I think. And this has more. I wouldn't have thought that we would end up with too many detox beds, but I think when I think we need to be nimble. And I think as long as we bring everything back, I agree with you that we need better processes. Of course we do. But this isn't one that I could understand a lot more your concern about the proposals that are coming up next. This is no additional money. It's money we promised to these counties. I've worked with them. I do not mind, by the way, working with you on the motion so that it doesn't dictate how much it's not, doesn't have to be 200 and 200. We don't dictate when the process is, and that it simply makes clear that we have to approve their project before they get more funds to implement a project. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and I guess so I think this is when process isn't great. This is what happens. Like a thing that's not a big deal that I would normally just vote for starts to get hard to when all this other stuff is happening. So, okay, let's move on unless other people have things. I will agree to that and to because of course there are huge needs everywhere, and doing an assessment and then using money to do what comes out of the assessment is really good practice, right? Like that's the practice we want to see. We want to see it in lots of places where people actually do an assessment. Maybe there should be some if they do the assessment, it should also, we recommend that their subdivision think about using the funds for the work that comes through their assessment. And that's great. And I feel like we can move on. But yes, I will have plenty to say on other ones that are let's do better process.
Sure. I'm fine with that, Liz. I'll send you the motion too to make sure you're comfortable with it. And I think we can move on, Joe.
Well, I think we need to hear from maybe Gordon, you called them out, Maggie, Melissa, people that Amber, just newbies, just in fairness. It is sort of a unique situation that Gordon explained, but I want to make sure I open the floor for
Brendan had his hand. Brendan had his hand.
Oh, sorry, Brendan. People are jumping around on my screen. Sorry, Brendan, go ahead, and then I'd open the floor up.
Just as a technicality, to be clear, as I understand it, both Franklin County and the Androscoggin County planning grants that Gordon is talking about are not, being paid. When we talk about the counties, these are not being paid to the counties. These are being paid to, in the case of Androscoggin, Central Maine Community Health, which is a part of Central Maine Healthcare. And Franklin County, as Gordon described, is part of Maine Health. So the counties may be participating as stakeholders, but the contract, the grant that's being proposed is not with the subdivision, is not to the subdivision. And it's also secondarily worth noting that the subdivisions have themselves access to free services from the Muskie School, from the Cutler Institute, I apologize, that my office is funding, and the council ought to consider the role that could play.
Sure. I think Liz is aware that contracts are actually with Healthy Community Coalition in Franklin County, one of your health prevention network partners, and Healthy Androscoggin, which their fiscal sponsors Central Maine Healthcare. So, Liz is very familiar with both those organizations. Bruce.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention kind of the collaborative work that's being done in each of those communities. This has not been happening in a vacuum, and they're not sitting back waiting for this funding to come. There's been a lot of planning and a lot of collaboration and a needs assessment that's already been done that I've been witness to in Androscoggin County. And they're fine tuning that. They've come up with a budget that these are this is funding that we at least we hinted at least that we were going to do this, and so these folks are in motion, they're ready to go, and so the planning process has already been started. And the other part is that each of these communities are doing public listening sessions, planning public listening sessions. This is a community effort that's already in motion, and I think it's being done, really well and very thoughtfully with great leadership in both communities. So I feel really good about where it's going. It's unfortunate that there isn't like just 1.5 million that's going directly to these communities, but they're doing the planning that's necessary so that if that funding is made available to them, that they're going to spend it well and address the needs that are identified by the community.
Thanks, Bruce. And Joe, I can't find my raise hand button. I just want to remind people that, again, these were two counties that we had promised to do a detox. We decided that neither community was ready to do that, nor was there a real need for those detox. So this is just reallocating funds to communities that we had promised to do something in, that we've decided it was better use of our funding to give them the opportunity to plan. So it's unique in itself. And I agree, there has to be a process, and we will work through that process. But I just want to remind people that it was a good decision to make, because spending the money on detox was not going to happen. This was just a better allocation of the funds. Sorry, Joe. I'll
No,
find my
that's
hand
great. Thank
button.
you, Pat. Melissa and then Maggie.
I think I jumped the line. Thanks, Maggie.
Oh, I'm sorry if I
Um,
missed you, Maggie. People are jumping around.
sorry to all of you if you're just seeing MCA, Melissa Hackett here. Yeah, I just wanted to be responsive to the request to weigh in. I'm aware that jumping in midstream to this work, and just appreciate, again, just going to underscore the process piece of it, because there's the process piece of it, and then the merits of the programs that we're looking at. And I just think where we can learn as we go in terms of what processes need to be in place as we reconsider or reallocate in any way is helpful to just make sure that the process is fair.
Good point. Maggie.
It also took me a long time to figure out how to raise my hands. I've been using Google Meets for too long. I actually am not a committee member, so I wanted to check too. I will have to break off at 3:30, but I was just joining as an MRC member, so maybe some guidance for myself if possible on whether that means I can weigh in on things or not. But I won't echo. I think the points raised around process have been raised well. That kind of 200K kind of feeling like an arbitrary number where maybe they need a lot more or maybe they need a lot less, but that momentum is more important right now. And the past conversations that have gotten us here and the uniqueness outweighs that at the moment for this particular circumstance. So that sounds like a way forward for this one while we work on a more long-term solution. Thanks.
Great. Any other comments? So Gordon, you're going to get the motion to this group?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's just sort of now kind of take stock of what I think we were charged to do today. So that was good. Gordon to manage that one. So I think we want to talk about kind of what I think we talked about at the end of the council meeting, a process for urgent requests. So I think we have ideas about that. We were charged with doing that. Mary and Gordon and I have done some work, and that I think would include sort of some of the projects that did get raised, but we all agree that we need a process for that. So we're going to talk about that, and maybe in that context, we can talk about the low barrier shelters and the recovery high school. And then I think the bulk of the meeting, hopefully, will be about contracting. So I think people really felt at the council meeting that we really need to tackle the 2023 awards. So we would ask Mary and Brendan to give us an update on that. What can we do to help? and then hopefully have time to dive into the 43 awards in terms of how the council or this committee can help with both process and tackling the nuts and bolts of that because we have limited resources. Does that sound like it's inclusive based on the council meeting we have? Any other? And I create a very rugged, rigorous agenda because there's so much to cover in the next month or two. So, but I know we're not going to get through everything today, but those are the things. But Mary, anything that you want to add, or Gordon?
No, I think that covers it. I just want to ensure that we have a chance to touch base, even if it's in the last 15 or 20 minutes around the 43 grant contracts and making sure we can get some sort of assignments with those and talk to committee members about who will run support. And that way I can work with all of you individually to keep those moving forward. So that'll just be my one kind of plug and request that we make sure we save at least 15 minutes to do that. But otherwise, I think that covers it, Joe. Thank you.
Great. So I think that the whole conversation around an urgent request process is really important. As a provider, and I said this to Mary and Gordon, if people think there's roads in to get the money, we'll have a million requests. So I think we do have to really nail that down so that it's fair and equitable and there's a process. So Mary, can I ask you and or Gordon to talk kind of through where we're at with that? Because you've both had your hands more on that work and the contracts throughout the last 6 weeks. So Gordon, feel free to weigh in too.
And Gordon, if it's helpful, what I'll do is I'll share my screen so that we can share a draft. And if you want to speak to it, I'll pull that up now.
Yeah, when we discussed at the end of the last board meeting, the issues regarding the low barrier shelters, and the history with respect to that, the fact that there was a project from Preble Street that was well scored, that was in tier one, as I recall, and we tabled it. At the same time, funding the low barrier shelters in Waterville and at Milestone. And we also tabled the Hope House one that now Preble Street will own on Saturday, February 1st. And I had indicated what I felt was was a problem, and that we had told Preble Street, we had told the low barrier shelters to please put in individual applications, not put in one application for all 4 shelters. Those 4 shelters being the ones, there's actually 5 because I think Preble Street considers both the Florence House and Elena's Way to be low barrier shelters. And so they did put them in. They were similar, the applications, and we then funded 2 and tabled 2 because we said we really wanted to know how they all worked together. So they did exactly what we asked them to do, and then funded 2 of them, didn't fund 2 of them because we didn't understand how they worked together. So I think they're when you talk about our special populations, people using these shelters, almost 100% of whom either are co-occurring or have substance use disorder are a very high priority. So as I mentioned this at the last meeting, there was a feeling that we needed a process to deal with such urgent requests. To me, I'm not sure whether it's an urgent request or whether, when we would come back to these items that we had expressly tabled. So I did do a very, very modest drafting of saying, well, with respect to these projects that we have, that I felt that the process I suggested was that 2 or more people on the council could petition to have a consideration of a project if the project had scored above average and had an urgent need. And some of that was whether there's an urgent need, a time-sensitive need for the project, such that not approving the project would likely result in the project activity not being implemented. And then also we could consider whether the application proposes an activity benefiting a special population which is disproportionately impacted by SUD or a geographic area of the state which is underserved with respect to SUD treatment and recovery support resources. So it puts everybody on the same wavelength in terms if they have a project that was scored above average that we didn't fund just because we stopped at 14 million. The truth is, I think we can continue to be, as I say, nimble and, given where we are with contract, and we'll work on that in the second half of this meeting, but it will be months and months and months before a lot of that $14 million is spent. So I'm in favor of, in fact, approving these additional low barrier shelters and adding them to the list of approved projects, recognizing that until we prioritize what would then be 45 projects, 44 projects, I guess, that it's going to be months, if not years, before all of these projects, the money goes out the door. And I would predict, having looked at the 43 projects and working on some of them, that some of them won't go forward at all. So we're not spending the cupboard bare. And I've tried to suggest a simple process for how we could consider it. I'm not proud of this drafting, by the way, but I promised you that I'd try to come up with something, and that's what I've come up with.
Okay, I see Melissa's hand up, and I'm sorry if I jumped out of order. Go ahead,
Thanks.
Melissa.
Thanks, Joe. It's always interesting to facilitate on the Zoom, right? Gordon, I appreciate you bringing this forward. I do think it speaks to being clear about processes. I'm curious if there's a sense of how much more money there is to spend. Like, is there a ceiling on this? How many proposals could come forward seeking additional funding during which time period? I just think that might be helpful to get into a little bit again in terms of scope and scale.
I can't answer that. I mean, I think in a perfect world, at each meeting of the council, the finance committee would give us a report on how much we had and how much had come in since the last meeting and make a recommendation on whether or not we could do more spending. We certainly left the November meeting believing that we did not deny any projects, that we approved 43. We spent what we were comfortable spending that day, recognizing that it will be months before the money is actually spent, and saying on the record that we would consider projects that had, there were many good projects there that did not get funded in, and that at each meeting of the council we would take a look at what money was available and consider additional projects that had, I mean, not additional projects, but projects that had been submitted, that got a good score, but we simply didn't have enough money that day to add them to the list. We do not have that kind of finance report every meeting, Melissa, and so I do absolutely believe myself in having had some discussion with Ben Mann that we could do this, that it, given that money, it really bothers me that this money is just sitting there. Now it's earning interest, but the needs are great. They're even greater today after the federal administrative action halting federal grants and scholarships. And we should do everything we can to get these projects started. So I believe that absolutely our financial situation could accommodate these two additional low barrier shelters, which would together be about, I think it's roughly $1 million.
Okay, Liz and then Pat.
Thank you for putting this together. And I think we do need a way to have, and I appreciate coming up with a process. One suggestion I would have, and one of the things that I think is frustrating for me, is that I don't want to vote anything that I haven't read or understand. And so I would love us to put in somewhere in here where, and I understand that waiting a month sometimes defeats the purpose of emergency, but there are meetings in between. There are executive committee, governance meetings, program and grants committee meetings, in which I think it's important for, if somebody wants to bring something forward, share the document and the information ahead of time so people have time to read it and then can come to the discussion prepared and understand what we're voting for or against. So perhaps in considering the position, it should be two or more council members may petition the council and ask for consideration. Perhaps it happens during some other meeting or at a council meeting. So it's got to happen at some meeting. Then everybody is given the information ahead of time. And I would suggest there be like at least a 3-day minimum in which people have the information. If other people have suggestions as to the time limit, the time frame, I think 3 seems reasonable, so that we can read it and make good decisions. Thank you.
So, a couple things. One is, I believe this is talking about current applicants. And so if it's current applicants, I don't see any problem with Mary getting to all the council members the application and the request at least 3 days before a meeting, because the applications are on file. And so we have them. If we're talking about other applications, we have to have some sort of process in place what that is. This looks like with Gordon, and the print's a little small. So I'm looking at that it's considering applications that weren't funded in the first round. So we have all the information that council members can have to do that. The other thing is to let people know that finance hasn't met in about a month and a half, almost 2 months. They really need to sit down, work it through, tell us what's there and what's not there. Is again, money's coming in, interest is there. So it's not like we don't have money, but as much as I know that Mary talks to Ben regularly, I know I do. The council really should be informed at all times what is left there. And so one of the goals of that finance committee this year will be to put together some sort of monthly report. The council members do know what money has come in, what money has gone out, what has been allocated for, even though it's sitting there, we can't spend it, it's been allocated, and what is there that could be considered for funding. And they are working on that, but I know they haven't met, so I can't answer that. I'm in full support of the shelters, again, but I think that's another discussion another time. But again, the question is the money there? And that's a Ben question.
So adding to what you're saying, Pat, I guess my struggle with the document, good job, Gordon, is just the limiting it to the 2024 applications. So I really like, so that's one of my, which we can deliberate, no pine about. The second struggle I have is that, this is kind of for new members too, is that we had conversations, and I think Greg Payne actually came to a council meeting and I was out that day. So I feel like we've put these low barrier shelters on kind of hold. So I think we need to talk about that, and like if people can dust off my memories or kind of I forget, but I think they're kind of in a unique situation because they got kind of shuffled into the process. And so I think to your point, Pat, we got to figure that out. But I think that, I would like this to be kind of what you said, Gordon. This could go on for a year. So like I would like this to be a little bit broader and not just focused on, and again, I can get voted down, but on the 2024 applications, because we could hear an urgent problem or urgent situation that I would want us to be able to consider. So go ahead, Gordon, and then Melissa.
So I would be happy to write up a new draft policy for applications that we've never seen before, that are urgent. My focus on this was really things in the tiers that were good projects and how we might consider them and be fair to everybody. Given that we've got to have some kind of prioritization, otherwise we just arbitrarily pick one or another. So I think if we're looking at things that are coming to us, Joe, for the first time, my draft would look considerably different than this. So given that we don't need to do that today, but I think that absolutely And we might want to even set aside a pool of money and say, as many philanthropic organizations do, they might set aside $500,000 for urgent needs that come up over the next year. Let me draft policy for consideration of application on an urgent need basis that we've never seen before. And I'll send everybody the draft. And again, I probably wouldn't get it mixed up with the next council meeting and bring it up at the next grants committee.
Perfect. Thank you, Gordon. That makes me happy. Okay, Melissa.
I think Gordon just spoke to a lot of the things I was going to raise. I like the idea of having them as two different policies. I want to leave us open to new applicants, but I also can imagine that that process looks really different in terms of who's already contributed as an application process and who would be brand new. So if Gordon's willing to do that work, I'd like to consider two different processes for those two different pools. And I just want to name support for how this has been strengthened by feedback from other members. I'm feeling better and better about the policy as folks are adding to it.
Great. Any other feedback on the policy? Bruce.
I'm just thinking more broadly about, how I don't think we have enough information from the financial side of things. And just, obviously somebody's addressed having a financial report from the finance committee, but there are always questions, right? And even, I know I know that Ben is very busy, but even if we could have a representative from the finance committee to be here at the programs and grants committee meetings, just so that we can get questions answered instead of saying, oh, we'll bring that to the finance committee. Oh, if we can do things in real time and help this kind of move a little more quickly, I'd feel a little bit better about it. And we just need more information to be able to make informed decisions. Sorry, I'm going to say one more thing. We also have a responsibility to the future of this council too. So we can't be spending all of this money up front. And I'd really like to be able to consult Ben on that and the finance committee about, what kind of dent are we putting into future? And I know that there are other settlements that are coming in and all those things. We need to know that to make, the best informed decision that we can.
Good points. Go ahead, Brendan.
Thanks. I wonder, especially if we're talking about, urgent or time sensitive needs, whether this policy ought to contemplate a way for the council to, try to communicate with or collaborate with, relevant subdivisions that also have resources and, a different process by which they, perhaps they could get money out, more quickly or a portion of the money, things like that. And I also, it may take the pressure off of, a given application or the council or whoever else. And then just technically, I recommend that we strike the last paragraph. We don't really need that. The bylaws are what they are.
Sure. Agreed.
Okay, any last comments on this document?
Joe, can I just chime in and sort of echo what Brendan mentioned? I think this is a great starting point for the council to consider, and also want to be realistic, as you all know, about what our capabilities are in terms of getting money out in a time-sensitive manner, and that there may be opportunities, as Brendan mentioned, for us to collaborate with the subdivisions, with the AG's office, other organizations who can get the money out in a quicker manner than we're able to do so that not only are we drafting a policy for, urgent requests such as we've seen and will continue to see, but then we actually have a means to distribute those funds in a similar manner. So I just want to mention, and we can continue those conversations.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, now what are the next steps, Gordon, in terms of what you need from the group or what we need to do
Well,
today?
I think we need to know whether the group is comfortable with us taking that amended draft policy to the full council on the 13th, and then using that draft policy to consider the request of the low barrier shelter.
So, how are people, what are thoughts? Pat,
So I think if you're going to consider the low berry shelter, I think that either Mary or I, somebody needs to get a hold of Ben. The question needs to really come about money. The second piece is that if it's going to be considered, I think in fairness, every to vote on that, I think the council needs to reread the applications and see the score on those and the information needed to be able to make those decisions. Because that's what I seems to be the clincher when we talk as a full council is well, why didn't they make that cut? What didn't happen? In the case of these shelters, I will tell you they were high scoring. They were high scoring grants, if I remember right, Mary. Again, but in fairness to them, let them see what their score was, where they landed, and let them have those grants. So those who didn't get a chance to read them will be able to read them and make that choice. And then again, having Ben be prepared to say, if we allot that money, what that means. If that makes sense to people. I mean, I'll tell you, I love the Lowberry show. I don't love. I wish they weren't necessary, but they're key in communities for safety. So, but that's my thoughts on that.
thanks, Pat. Chastity.
All right, I'll turn my camera on when I talk. Um, we also meet prior to the next council meeting, right?
Mhm.
So with that, I think maybe we get them, well, I mean, we have them now, but like dig into them so we can make a decision to make a recommendation at our next meeting to bring that to the full council, and we can really dig into it more when there's more people who have read through it. Because even if we all get it, like 24 hours, 48 hours before the meeting, you can't really like spend time with it the way that you want to. And this gives us a couple weeks anyways to really do that.
When is our next governance meeting, Mary? I mean, grants and programs.
11th, it's just 2 days before, Gordon.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
the
is it
11th.
1:30 to 3?
It's 3 to 5, like this one.
Oh, okay.
Gordon, there's an executive committee meeting that day as well. I don't know if we've
1:30.
noticed.
That's the 1:30 one, maybe.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
3 to 5 on the 11th. Okay. That's great. I didn't realize that, Chastity. That's perfect. Yep.
So just not to go down this rabbit hole, but I will. So Pat, I like what you said. So where does that conversation fit with the policy that Gordon put forth?
So for me, it's a different. Um, well, it fits with Gordon's policy. We're reconsidering the grant money. Um, the only thing that you would have to do with that is, I think, if I'm looking at policy, first of all, the policy hasn't been approved by the full council. So there's step number one. So that has to happen for it to fall within the policy. The full council has to approve the policy. So um, the other piece was in this case, if I remember the meeting right, we placed him on hold and then never went back to it, which was different than any other of the programs that we just said they didn't make the cut. We put them on hold, but then never went back and reviewed it. So that in my mind is a little bit different. I don't know, but if in to go along with what we talked about today, if they went through the policy would first have to be approved by the full council.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, Liz and then Melissa.
I think the reason that we put, like, if I remember correctly, we put them on hold because there were some questions because PCHC had had put in theirs for Hope House, but it was transferring over to Preble Street. And so there were some questions about Preble Street having multiple, what will it look like? I think there were just enough things up in the air that we said, let's wait to get more information. What we got today, was there more information that we got from them? Because I feel like that there were some questions and it wasn't about the merits, or it was more about like, how does this work, right? Because Preble has multiple sites now, and how much, and I just feel like, do we have questions we want to ask of them? I understand that we're doing like two parallel processes here. One is like dealing with the requests and knowing that the low barrier shelters, this has been a thing that we've been talking about for a while, and this policy of bringing emergency things. We're sort of like parallel tracking them because we can't vote on the policy today. But I don't want to like lose the momentum on the low barrier shelter, and that we've been talking about this for 6 months. And I feel like we had questions. Am I wrong in that?
Nope.
No,
Head on. Thank you,
no,
Liz.
we had questions. We had, did they receive, I think the time did they receive the state funding that they needed? There was rumors that the attorney general was going to put some money in, and then we didn't know how the whole thing. So yeah, there were questions, and that's why it was placed on hold. But a lot of it wasn't the actual project, if I remember right. It was about the funding flow.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Can I
Okay.
chime in, because I can't raise my hand, and just
Yeah.
mention that in reviewing some of my emails and our discussions, we did say that we wanted to go back and discuss with the low barrier shelter certain questions. Our objective was to have a conversation once the new council convened about what those questions were. So I just want to reiterate that and say that I'm more than happy to reach out to them with a list of questions. If we can decipher the timeline for doing so, that gives you all time to let me know the questions and gives them adequate time to respond ahead of the 11th.
Okay, let's hold that thought because I think we need to do that work. Melissa, then Gordon, then Brendan.
Yeah, just again, I'm going to keep being the newbie perspective here. The degree to which we can come to the next full council, I won't use the word we. Anyone who's volunteering to like do this follow-up and ask the questions and bring it back, I think it would be very helpful if there was a summary that brings everybody on the council up to speed of this work, right? As somebody who wasn't there in November when it got tabled, right? To just be able to say, this is where the low barrier shelters were, this is what's happened, this is where we are now. We need to vote on this proposal. I'd love to have folks look at the policy before the meeting, again, with that advance notice, so that folks come prepared for the order of events that we just talked about, right? That they're going to need to approve the policy, and then they're going to be asked to vote on these proposals. So just like teeing that up for people so that we can be expeditious in our time in the council, I think would be very helpful. And I say that recognizing that I'm not the best person to offer to do that. So just naming that somebody being able to provide a summary ahead of that vote would be very helpful.
It's a great idea, yes. Gordon.
Mary's saying that she could draft a summary of the application process in advance of maybe I'm not sure whether you meant the council meeting or the committee meeting, but our questions were very vague. They really were. All the four applications are virtually the same, by the way. But I really would encourage, there's a lot of information there. So I would encourage for us to read the application. You don't really need to read two of them. You don't need to read the two that we approved, because they're all the same. And they obviously worked on them together. And I would encourage us to read the application, and then to submit any questions we have about how this works to Mary, to get to Mark Swan. And then we could potentially give Mark Swan 15 minutes at our grants meeting, not the full council meeting. If we have questions, Swan would be happy to come and answer them. I mean, they have a pretty well-oiled machine around these various shelters. I mean, they are very expensive to operate. They do have some money from the Attorney General's office. They have some money from the state, but they also very badly needed us to help make up the gap. So I think, again, if we could get those questions to Swanee before the 11th, and then give him an opportunity to answer them in writing or come on the 11th. And then we could have I think, as long as all the other people on the council, there's another 6 or 7 of them, take a look at that application before the meeting on the 13th. Seems to me we can up or down, have a good discussion.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brendan.
I have two comments, one about the shelters and one about the Gordon's proposed process. The one about the shelter is that, I could look into getting, seeing if I can, obtain a copy of my office's contract with the low barrier shelters to see, what basis, like what exactly it is my office is funding, so that that could just be a cut and paste, kind of thing. And it's also it's important because my belief, but I'm not sure about this, is that it's focused on providing funding to support the services the shelters provide to individuals who are struggling with substance use disorder, rather than, and this is significant, shelter generally. In other words, like, you know, it I think that it hews pretty tightly to the approved uses as expressed in the exhibits to the MOUs, rather than funding housing generally, which, I think, if the council does that, it can provide a significant plug for, the funding hole that, they're dealing with. So I can inquire about that. But I just want to flag for the council that it's probably that I would recommend that the council take a similar tight focus on, the application of its funding. The the other the other point is about the process. And Joe, because we're talking about the shelters right now, I'm happy to return to that later on and keep the focus on this topic of the shelters.
Okay. Any other comments?
Joe, can I just request that before we move on from the shelters, that we talk about when, I think what'll work best is if the council committee members send me questions that they would like the low barrier shelters to react to. And if it's possible to get those questions by Friday, if that doesn't feel like too much of a push, then I can get those to the shelters by Monday and give them a week to provide a response to us in writing. And then also invite them to join, on an as needed basis, just let them know when we're meeting and if they can make themselves available. So if by Friday evening or even Sunday at the very latest feels appropriate for you all to send me questions, then that would be my ask at this point.
That sounds great. That sounds fair.
Great. And I'll send out a reminder on Wednesday. I'll send one out tomorrow to you all.
Sounds good. So I know time's a ticking, but I don't really know. We left the last meeting talking about the recovery school. So I'm not sure where that lands. So I'm gonna throw that in since I'm here. We just talk quickly about that and what that looks like. So Gordon had made a motion and you pulled it back. But Gordon, are you prepared to talk about that, or does it seem like the right
Sure,
place? Or
I can tell you where we are with it, I think. I do know that the Attorney General has it under consideration in terms of what he might be funding. And I hope to see him tonight at the governor's speech, and I'll ask him about it because we really need an answer by the 17th, by the 13th, when the parties need an answer from us. So if the Attorney General obviously feels that he could do the $588,000. It's a pilot. It's a 2-year pilot. Ben's very focused to remember on. We haven't spent enough time in 2 years on one-time project, one-time spending versus anything that might be sustainable. He's very nervous about that. But the high school would be it would be a pilot project for 2 years. So if Aaron does it, we don't have to worry about it. If he's unable to do it, then Dr. Vinsel and I are prepared, if you pass the draft policy, we would petition the council to consider it. And we would have you all look at the application again. And because it is a clear case that we've been told that if we can't commit to it, they don't need the money in February, but they need a commitment in February so that they can, have the spots for the students ready by the fall class of 2025 is what they anticipate. So that's where we are with it. There is a bill in the legislature too to fund it, but again, not only do I think it would be unsuccessful, but by the time this legislative budget is done, it'd be way too late. So I think this is their best shot. They've got kind of two shots at it. And they've certainly talked to their county. They've asked for county funds, but most of the county funds up there have been directed to other opioid uses.
Okay. Any thoughts from the group? Any questions? Any strategies for this conversation?
Pat's got her hand up.
Sorry, go ahead, Pat.
So I just want to remind people, if you remember I believe one of the authors of the grant attended our public forum. And at the time, many of the members of the council at that point wanted to re-examine and re-look at the application of the Recovery High School, because after listening, they wanted more questions answered, and they thought the project really was something that was unique to Maine, certainly served a purpose, and also was there was located in an area it's frequently underserved. And again, it's a very unique project combining the university along with the public school system, along with taking care of adolescents, which is often lack of services are everywhere. So that's why it's sort of brought here, because there was at least 3 to 4 members of the council that day that said we want to revisit and bring this forward to the council. I was one, Paul was one, and I really can't think of the other one.
Thanks. That's good. Good reorienting. Okay, Liz.
I don't need to say anything now. I feel like I would like to voice some of my concern about it so people are aware of this concern, and maybe it can be fixed I don't know if it can be fixed along the way or not. I did some research in the literature, and it looks like recovery high schools have really good results. They, across the boards, I was looking at, the 45 different recovery high schools that have happened across the country. They have great results in terms of graduation rates, great results in terms of lowering substance use amongst young people who are in recovery. I think a major concern I have is the cost per pupil. So in the research, the highest cost was $16,000 more than the average cost of public school. So in Maine, our average cost is $14,000 a year per pupil. So if you say, so usually recovery high schools are somewhere between $1,000 more per pupil to $16,000 is the top end. So that's $30,000. They are asking for something that would equal $36,000 per year per pupil. And I'm just not sure. I believe in this, and I would love to see this happen in a place where the cost per pupil is one that's replicable, sustainable. That doesn't seem like a sustainable amount of money per pupil. So again, it's not like the idea or the place. I am with it. I'm just not sure it's a good investment at that level. If they can come back and say that's actually not the cost per pupil, that's what I figured out from their budget and based on what they said they were going to serve in the 2 years. So I have right now, I wouldn't vote for it based on what I've read and what I see as in terms of an investment that we make as a council. So I want to share that with you now so that there's some prep if that's what people, because that's
great. It's great, Liz, because they're probably watching, and so they can address that.
Yeah.
it wasn't something that had come up before, I'll be honest.
I think
So
it's a
that's
good
good.
question, and I think they can probably answer it.
Yeah, well, they'll
I
have
may
a
not
chance.
like the answer, but I bet they can answer the question.
And I think largely, Liz, the cost might be that it's a residential school, right? I mean, I think that's something that would be a cost driver, I think, but again, we'd need to hear from them. But I'm sort of trying to get to process, so I welcome more conversation to sort of like, so Liz made some great points. So where do we go? Like we can move it on, we can decide what to do, but what sort of are some suggested next steps?
Well, I think if again, my feeling is that we don't have really a process to consider it until we pass the draft policy. If we draft the past policy as a council on the 17th, then we will be prepared to, give us 15 minutes whether to have a discussion and a vote on whether this meets the policy and we can authorize it or not. I mean, I don't know any other fairer way to do it. To me, the low barrier shelters are a little different because Preble Street was in tier one. It's an anomaly. They're the only program in tier one that we didn't fund. It's the highest level of special population that we have. So that's just an anomaly that needs to be addressed, in my opinion. This is a little different because you want to give everybody the same opportunity that we're giving the Recovery High School that had an average. I don't know, there's probably, I don't know, Mary would know, there's probably 15, 20 projects with higher than average scores. And they all need to have the same opportunity to come in and say, oh, our need is urgent. Don't know how many would choose to do that, but once we have that policy, then this can be the first one that we consider. And I just want to give them every chance. And that's what we're doing. Yeah. It's the innovation, and the part that's innovative is the residential part during the week, that they will be housed on the campus with a house mother and a house father. They will be fed. That probably is much different than the regular other recovery high schools. Nobody does this in the country, I'm told. And that's why it is supported by the American Association of Recovery High Schools, partly because it's rural, it's innovative. I think worth doing, probably. That's me.
Well, thank you, Gordon. Go ahead, Melissa. You'll have the last word and then we'll move on.
So dangerous. I really appreciate this because as a council member, as a new member, I'm really thinking about like evidence-based feasibility and innovation. And so like balancing these things in terms of what we invest in is very top of mind for me. And I'll just say, I would echo some of the concerns that Liz raised when I did my research. A lot of it was the evidence supports it, but it's very expensive model. And so what does sustainability look like? And I think it would be helpful to maybe hear from the school about how they're were allocated and if it is in fact the price tag that it needs to be at.
Thank you. So I am going to table this conversation for our committee. Madam Chair, I'm going to pass it to you. So that'll be voted on, and depending on how that vote goes, then you can decide how to proceed. And then it can come back to us, but I think at this point it's move back to you, Pat. Does that sound
Sounds reasonable to me.
okay, Brendan?
You're on mute.
So this is about the proposed policy or whatever you want to call it. The the effect of the policy, as I understand it, is that at least as far as applications that were considered as part of the November vote, this would put before the council applications that didn't get funded before, of which there are however many that there are, using the criteria of time of urgency and timeliness, and the other criteria. I I wonder for the council's consideration, for the group's consideration, whether, because the effect of it is to put, a particular application um, in a position to be funded where similarly scored applications will not be considered. To Liz's point about, getting information ahead of time and reviewing it ahead of time. I, I just wonder whether the policy should also include consideration of similarly scored applications, so that the council can understand what it's doing in context. I don't know how to evaluate, timeliness or urgency or, or some of the other issues. And I don't want to try to make it, more specific in a lawyerly way. But I do wonder whether if we're putting, one application ahead of another application and they scored equally or similarly, whether they ought to be considered in context. And I'm obviously not a member of the council or the group, so you don't have to consider this, but it's, a suggestion.
Thank you, Brendan. Brendan, good to consider. Uh, Gordon.
Appreciate it, Brendan. I don't agree with it because I think again that so much of what I mean, what's important to me is everybody gets the same opportunity. Everybody gets the same opportunity. And if I'm sitting there with a project that I really think is urgent, it's not my responsibility to bring to the council, other similar projects. Everybody will have the same information. Everybody will have our policy. Everybody can try to get two people up from the council to petition that their need is urgent. This is really a secondary process. The most important thing we're going to do today is try to move the projects that we've already approved. Now, it's because we've got a couple situations that I think were fairly compelling. I'm glad we're having this discussion, but I think to try to, I think to take it an additional step to say we can consider the context. We can educate the 5 new people about the 4 tiers and the decisions we made. It was pretty, they can watch the tape of the meeting where we quite subjectively, funded these 43 projects. But the urgency is to do the contracts for the 43 and not overcomplicate, I think, things that might, other requests that come in. My 2 cents may not be worth much.
Thank you, Gordon.
Joe, can I just echo what Gordon said? And, I'm fully in support of creating a process. I think that's the most important thing the council can do if we're going to open up any sort of funding related to the grant application. But I do think our focus needs to remain on finishing the current contracts that we have, and making sure that we do that well and with the focus of the council. And so I just want to say that out loud, that we can do both simultaneously, but that we do need to make sure we're pushing forward the other contracts, and getting the support of the council to do so.
Thank you. And I am capturing all this, so I will bring it back at an appropriate time. So let's move into contracts, Mary and Brendan. And so why don't we start with 2023 and where we're at with those contracts and what the committee might be able to do to help.
Yes, let me, I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet to share with you all that provides an overview. Just give me 1 second. Okay, this is actually the same spreadsheet that was shared during the council meeting. So this will look familiar to you all. Okay. All right. So I will start. As you can see, I've updated the spreadsheet today to reflect where things stand. Let me start with Barry Dunn. I had a great meeting with Barry Dunn this morning, and we'll be sending them their updated deliverables to provide support during our contracting process. With the way that the deliverables have been updated based on the conversations we've had, initially, I believe we had them on board for a 3-month contract extension. And I proposed looking at more of a 5-month. And so as part of their review of the deliverables, which I went through it with them today, I don't expect any issues. They're going to let me know what the current contract, or excuse me, the total contract amount will look like, given that we're asking something slightly different from them than we had initially. So that contract is in good standing. Once I have confirmation and final review from Barry Dunn, I will send that over to the AG's office for their review and to help get that finalized. For the harm reduction, the SSP contracts, we want to thank the AG's office and Brendan and Grayson for all their help to get these contracts finalized. We have payments that have gone out for almost all of them. Some are expected on Friday, but all of those are in good standing. As many of you are aware, the Health Equity Alliance HEAL, their certification has been revoked by the Maine CDC. Initially, that was suspended. So I will urge the council, and Joe, you and I can talk about this, but at the next Program and Grants Committee meeting, I'd like for us to have conversations about how we can support potentially other organizations now that HEAL is not open, and that is surely having an impact on the services that they're able to provide. So more to come for that contract specifically, but I want to open it up to Brendan or Grayson or Katrina. Do you have any updates, or have I missed anything with the SSP contracts?
No, Pat's signed the last of them, and we're moving those through the process. So,
wonderful. Thank you. For the prevention contracts, again, looking at these December allocations only right now. Melissa, thank you very much for helping me finalize a draft to share with Mayan. I got that draft off to Beth this morning, and that is in with them for review. And I will also be sharing that with the AG's office for their review as well. My hope, and again, we'll see where things stand and how this process works out, is that we can have that contract finalized within the next 2 to 3 weeks to get that ready for the February 13th council meeting. Brendan has been working on updates to the Peter Alfond contract. Gordon has also been involved in those discussions. We met with Adam Burke, their executive director, around the holidays, and they provided some input on that contract. I know Gordon had shared a little bit about that conversation at the January council meeting. And so there are some revisions and certain aspects of that contract that we've been asked to look into, and Brendan is working on that. And the last of the prevention contracts for now is the flexible funding for families. And I had a great meeting with both Liz and Melissa last week to discuss next steps. As some of you may recall, I believe it was back last February, we had some folks from the Office of Family Independence come and speak to the Program Grants Committee about their work. So what we'll be doing is convening a group to help us make steps forward in the drafting of those contracts. And then Liz and Melissa have offered to provide support in helping to get that drafted. Brendan, again, I'll open up to you. Any comments or notes about the prevention related contracts?
I had a conversation, a very brief one today with Adam Burke. I've been actively, working on the contract, and I'm looking forward to taking a look at the draft of the Mayan contract in conjunction with that. It sort of raises similar issues, at least conceptually. So, I'm actively working through it, and I talked with Adam about, some of his concerns and some of what I'm trying to do to address them. one of the big issues one of the issues that the foundation identified initially was so two of the issues are in the Rider A, the kind of deliverables and the reports. Essentially, that you know the um, the foundation has an existing process for both for both its application for its grantees and for the reporting from its grantees, and it sort of highlights a little bit the a challenge that the council, I think, and Mary, I don't, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn on this, but I think reporting is kind of an open issue generally with the council's contracts, and how to do that in a way that's, um, that is manageable, for the council's grantees and can be relatively uniform. One thing that slows down contracting is the need to customize each contract and negotiate each contract. And the extent to which the council can make things uniform, you know, I'm thinking a lot about the need to balance that with what I hear a lot from the council about the need to be creative and flexible, and broader than traditional state contracts. So those are some of the issues that I'm thinking about as I work through these contracts.
So Brendan, how can we help with that? I mean, we talked last at the council meeting that we are working sort of in the state model.
Yeah.
So many of us fundees, grantees like TOA, we're used to it. Peter Alfond might not be, but what can we do to sort of help with that?
I think uh, a having I think primarily, having responsibility for, as we've talked about, putting together the substantive provisions in Rider A, and crafting the deliverables and the reporting in a way that makes sense in that universe. There won't be uniformity across those. For example, Rider A starts with definitions. The council probably won't be using the same definitions across categories of contracts, but to the extent that council can end up with general categories of contracts like an SSP contract or a detox contract or a prevention contract, then you can have, and my expectation is that we'll have that within, by the time June rolls around at the latest. You'll have uniform templates that can be a starting point for future contracting. So I think putting together those sort of general categorical, Rider A's would be the biggest help. And there's been a lot of discussion already about identifying, the right council members who can work on that.
So when I hear you say June, that's just like, and Mary, you mentioned a date that sounded a long way out. That just like sounds so far away. So is there anything again that we can do? You know, I don't know. I think this money was sort of allocated in the middle of December of 2023. So I don't know.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me you're talking about the 2023. Oh,
Yes, yes.
I apologize. Um, oh, sorry, I was thinking of the November grants. Um, in terms of, so, I'm working on the Alphon one. I expect to have, like, that's at the top of my list. I'm actively working on it this week. Um, you know, I'm also turning from that to, sort of template contract. And, the other contracts will be coming to me for review, and I'll be focusing on those as well, pretty quickly. So I'm very focused on trying to get, as much of those in place, right away.
Okay, that's good. Good, good, good. Pat, did you want to say something or did you take your hand down?
I took my hand down because he clarified
Okay.
what he was saying because I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I was thinking the same way you were, Joe, but
Yeah.
when Brendan clarified, I was fine.
Okay. And Mary, my last question around the flex funding, the caps have a different, I don't know if you still are talking with Sue Powers, because I think that she should be involved representing the caps. Like the Office of Family Independence has sometimes different requirements, and they really want this money to be flexible. And I know there are council members who really stress that. So I just want to make sure we have Sue's voice because she's fantastic too.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Joe. And that was part of the discussion that Liz, Melissa, and I had, that contracting with the CAP agencies themselves is likely the best way for us to distribute the funding to ensure it's flexible and they can use the money as it was intended by us and
Perfect.
not the state necessarily. Yes. So
Perfect.
there will be multiple contracts with that one. We're anticipating similar to what we're doing with the SSPs.
Great. Any questions or comments from the council about the December 2023 money, what you've heard on the contract status? It's hard. I can't see people, but okay, Mary, you want to dive right into the next
No,
the
I
November?
want to report on my 3 contracts.
I'll go ahead, Gordon. Sorry. I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself.
No, that's okay. I can do this quickly. Um, so I took responsibility for 3 of the contracts, one for Tessa's house and the 2 county planning contracts that we talked about earlier. My original drafts are all done. I've used a template that Brendan and Mary are both kind of responsible for. I have 9 sections in those contracts. They come together pretty well. I'm working with the lawyer for Tessa's place, so they're not waiting for us. I'm waiting for her to get back to me. We hope to open that facility in March. The 2 county ones I've talked about, but the contracts have been essentially all drafted. We're just days away from having something that's finalized. Now, obviously, because of the need to change that motion that I talked about, I can't finalize and get signatures on the 2 county planning ones until after the February 13th meeting. But I have found it pretty. I anticipate that when we get to the 43, I could do a lot of that work and then have Brendan review my drafts. And because the Attorney General does sign the contracts. And so I really think that every contract that we've done, we've learned from. And I think we could get on a bit of a roll that we could do quite a bit in a short period of time. I don't want to be involved in the Alphon one because that's really a discussion between the state and the state terms and conditions. That's not my strength. My strength is the content and deliverables reporting. We've still got a lot to work on about who how we report, how we receive reports. We still only got 1 staff person. Evaluation of the contracts. We really got a lot to do. But to me, I still feel this urgency in getting the contracts that we've been working on for the year, get those done, and then we can tackle and prioritize the 43 because we really need to get these projects started. Thanks, Joe.
Perfect. Mary, do you want to update on Milestone? I'm sorry I jumped over that.
No worries. Milestone's contract is in a great place. The Milestone team reviewed it and gave us feedback very quickly. They had a couple areas where we needed their input, and they did so. So now I'm just finalizing some of the language. It's really around the purpose and introduction and getting the exhibits all finalized. And then I plan to have that ready for the AG's office to review and getting that over to Brendan by Thursday. And then we should be ready to have that one signed.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's in a good place.
Okay.
I also want to echo what Gordon mentioned kind of briefly. The way that I think about these contracts is this December 2023 allocation, and I say that to encompass everything really beyond the grants, that the process by which we complete those contracts has been a learning process for us. And so when we go through the grant contracts, those will be a separate process. And so I do want to make sure that as we continue these discussions, which we've already done, we just keep the conversations sort of separate and unique, because the way that we're moving about finalizing sort of both groups of contracts is different. And that's why we're having this next discussion separately.
Great.
All right.
Okay, well, let's move right into the next group.
Okay. So I will pull up yet another spreadsheet to share with you all. And I want to thank Gordon for his help on this. I think it was an executive committee meeting at the beginning of January, Gordon presented a draft of groupings for each of the contracts. And that was a way, that we could look at developing templates for similar projects. And that way we could also involve council members on more than one project, but the focus would be, again, more or less the same. So as you'll see in this spreadsheet, I've noted the project category, and for the most part, that reflects what Gordon involved. Let's see if this is the right one. Great. Here in this project category, you'll see, and I've just organized them by category. This is not the order by which we should do it necessarily. This was just the order I sorted it. What I would like from the council members at this point is, I will consider myself the lead for most of these, and coordinating with all of you with the grant materials, making sure you have all of that, and at least for right now, taking lead on communications with grantees. But I would like to make sure that we can get at least one council member, again, more or less assigned to help draft the deliverables for each of these. And as you'll recall from our last council meeting, what we're hoping to have you all involved in is really drafting sort of the outline of what the deliverables will look like, starting with the grant application materials. And again, unlike the December allocations, we have a really nice starting point because of how thorough in many ways this grant application was. And so if each council member can take a couple of these and help draft those deliverables, when we have Barry Dunn on board, they will be involved in various aspects of the contracting process, but part of what they'll help me do is translating the deliverables that you all help draft into sort of legal language and into more or less final contract form, so that we can get, their expertise on that side of things and have you all help with the subject matter side of it. Does that make sense? Great. So I guess, we, again, right now, I recognize this is a committee meeting, not a full council meeting. But what I'd like to do is if folks can sort of look at this, and I'll scroll through it, and maybe just jump in and let me know which contracts you are interested in supporting, and how many you think you have the bandwidth for. That would be a great starting point. And then what I can do is reach out to other council members, at this point, knowing all of you well enough to make the request for support, depending on what the contract looks like. Joe, are you all right if I call on hands? Okay.
Yeah.
Gordon, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I don't think we should do that. I think that the people should look at the list and then communicate with you one-on-one on ones that they might be comfortable with. Right now, we could have a broader discussion about how do we prioritize these, which ones do we start with? And there's several ways to look at it. You could start with the biggest. You could go biggest to smallest. You could go ease of drafting and doing the deliverables. There's several low-hanging fruit here. I mentioned to at least one or two of you today that I could take the Wabanaki $1 million contract, sit down with Lisa Soccer Basin, and in an afternoon have that all done, have it all drafted, get that $1 million out of the way. There's many others that the process before you start thinking about deliverables, you take that application. There's some of these that are really not low-hanging fruit. They're, they're really high. And you're going to have to spend a lot of time. I'd rather not give you examples because I think it would, you might think I'm reflecting badly on the other, on the applicant. But many of the applicants are not sophisticated in contracting. They may not even be sophisticated in the project that they're doing. We've got a brand new methadone clinic by somebody who's never operated a methadone clinic. We've got a call center by people who've never had a call center before. We've got those things are going to take a lot of time before you even get to the point of okay, here's your draft. Um, you could prioritize them on the basis of need. What is the most urgent need out there? Is it harm reduction? Is it treat? What is it safe spot? Which I love. I want people answering these calls from people who are using drugs and saving their lives. So I think that's the discussion we got to have in the next 20 minutes. I'm sorry, Mary, to suggest that, but I think that's because if you just start asking people who's going to help, it doesn't do me a thing in terms of, well, who goes first?
And Gordon, I appreciate that you brought that up because you're right. It doesn't prioritize which contracts go first. And I think my intention in asking for assignments sort of was not in prioritizing which contracts go first. It was to get you all on board and sort of up to speed with certain contracts. And as you'll recall from the January council meeting, there is a survey that I'm close to sending out, and Grayson's been helping me sort of finalize it to get out to the grantees with the boilerplate language and to ask questions along the lines of what Gordon just mentioned of, is this a startup? Do you need initial seed funding to get going? And if so, potentially we should prioritize those applications first. Is this what type of funding support? Are you up against any funding cliffs or deadlines? And I'm starting to hear from folks, who say by the end of May, our grant runs out, and if I don't get this money in time, I've got to lay some staff off and then rehire them. So I fully acknowledge that that's what we're up against here, and I do think when we are able to get feedback from those grantees, which will be a quick survey, they can get it done in 10 minutes tops. That will also help us prioritize which applications go first. And I think when we get to the next program and grants committee meeting, we can have a really strong sense of where the applicants stand or the grantees stand to support those discussions. So I just want to mention that, Gordon, that we'll also have sort of more information coming to help us with that. And we can have those discussions now, but just to make mention of that. Melissa?
Thanks, Mary. I would really support that in terms of process, right? That again, all the grantees have an opportunity to provide feedback on the criteria that we will make decisions about prioritizing or triaging, as you will. And I do think I would benefit from looking through the list together or I don't know if it's an option to create it as a shared Google document for members. If we all send you the same 3 organizations that we want to support, that doesn't really help you figure out who doesn't have a lead person. And I think it makes sense to have those liaisons in place even before the survey, so folks can be really focused on building those relationships.
Great, thank you. Pat?
So as I go through this list, I just want to remind people that you have some grants in here that are like $20,000. I don't think a contract, an agreement should be really complicated for $20,000, for there's one in here for 60,000. Then I think in some way when we look at prioritizing these, there's one in here for 15. Again, some of these contracts are really small. And it seems to me that there'll probably a one-time check that goes out to them with some reporting requirement. But if they're asking for that little bit of money, I don't think you should have to wait 6 months to get that. And I think, again, there should be a way to prioritize those smaller. Again, they may be, I mean, I'm looking at $20,000 for Summit House. Those should be easy contracts to get out. They shouldn't, again, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. But there must be a way to get a $20,000 contract out in a reasonable amount of time and move that forward. But that's just in my observations and looking at it.
Thank you, Pat. Chastity?
Sorry, I feel like I'm kind of throwing a wrench in thinking about prioritization. But as we're going through and thinking about that, I feel like we also need to inquire from folks who's going to be affected with funding with everything happening federally right now, because they also need to be moved up towards the top instead of pushed out.
Yeah,
You're
well,
right, Chastity.
I,
Thanks, Chastity. That's a great point. And I can add that to the survey questions so that we have a sense from grantees. Also, Gordon, go ahead.
yeah, great point, Chastity. I probably got dozens of emails today with people panicking. The last one is that they're going to stop Maine care payments. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it will take a while to sort this out, but that should be part of the very simple 4 or 5 questions that Mary's going to send out. Is, how urgent is this need in your view? Some of them may not be ready and really would rather hear from us in June or something. So I agree with you that while there's many different ways to look at the list, that urgent need should be one of them. Unfortunately, Pat, I've got to correct something that you said, because I am a lawyer, and unfortunately, it doesn't really matter whether it's $15,000 or $1 million. And I'll ask Brennan to comment on this. The elements of the contract are the same. And unfortunately, the crap that the state, not Brendan, but that remember, once Aaron signs off, once the Attorney General signs off on the contract, then it's still going to be a week to a month to get the check out, because it goes over the DAFs. So that's my last point on that, is that we really should look at some opportunities to combine. Anytime that we can combine 2 contracts into one, and that would be a wonderful thing. And I do think there's a few of those opportunities.
Thank you, Gordon. There are a couple on the sheet that I've already done that with. For instance, Maine Pretrial Services has
That's the obvious one.
yeah,
Obvious.
so they're already combined in many ways. So when we talk about the, again, assignments, it sounds like what would be best for the committee is for me to send out a spreadsheet, and I don't know if we all have access to Google Docs, so I'll email you a spreadsheet, and similar to what we did with the LOIs, I'll ask you to just download a version of the spreadsheet with your initials, and then go through, sort of mark the applications that you feel you could support, and then email those back to me. And then once I hear from everyone, again, I can reach out to folks individually, and we can try to fill in the gaps there. I think
Will
that would
that
be.
go out to all the members of the council, or just the members of the Grants and Programs Committee?
I'm going to start with the Program and Grants Committee first, because we've had the discussion, but then I will reach out to the full council. I think the good news is we've got a majority of folks on this committee. And then I'll reach out, to the other folks after that. I do want to raise a question for the council, because I've received this from a couple folks. And this also came up with the SSPs. And Brendan, please weigh in here. But, there is an extent to which, as far as I understand, that if organizations need to begin their project work sooner rather than later, let's say they need to hire staff to, begin developing certain aspects of the project, or they have a building that, they need to sign a lease for now, or they lose the opportunity. Some folks are working to get loans to begin some of their grant work. And I just want to raise that with the council, so that if questions arise, we can provide assurance that as long as the expenses fall under the MOU and the same approved uses that will be in their contract, that we can provide reimbursement for them once the contracts are signed, so that some of these folks can begin doing the work. And I know when we reach out, we'll receive feedback from a handful of them that, they've already started and they've taken the initiative on their own to get the work done, knowing that the demand isn't going to wait. until our contracts are ready. So I just want to bring that up to the committee for feedback, and also for a discussion if it's needed. And again, Brendan, if you want to weigh in here around any sort of the legal
Yeah,
implications, please do.
yeah, the issue is called backdating. What we cannot, what I'm told, we generally cannot do, and it happens, but it's strongly disfavored. And the council will run into further delays to the extent it engages in this. The practice is basically, having a contract term begin, say, for example, January 1st, but it's not signed until sometime after January 1st. That, the rationale is, we've been incurring expenses in January 1st. We'd like to be able to use these funds to pay for those expenses. And, that's understandable. So the challenge is, we, as I understand it, need to start the term of a given contract, after when it's signed, not before. And that causes challenges with, trying to pay for those expenses. Um, I've heard it suggested that when that needs to happen, an agency could do sort of an interim contract, but I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know how that would be different from just doing the whole contract, in terms of, how long it takes and complexity and everything else. I think that suggestion is made with like very large contracts that go through like lots of reviews, perhaps it could be broken down. I don't think that's kind of what we're talking about here, but I do want to just flag that issue for everybody. Thanks, Mary.
So Brendan, to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, and there's a good chance I'm not, so I apologize in advance. We are discouraged from backdating the contracts, which I understand. Is there still an opportunity though for, again, if it's a pressing situation, for the council to provide essentially reimbursement, or for our funding to provide reimbursement for services that directly align with the program or services that have been approved by the grant funding, potentially up to a certain amount, or for folks who are incurring expenses that are
Like
hard to avoid, I think is
like,
what
yeah, like sort of, uh, I I think that is fine. I'll ask the question internally, but I think that's fine. I'm not sure, the example that I've heard is someone takes out a loan or incurs debt or something. So, the council's funds can be used to repay that so long as the the borrowed money is used on approved uses. And the council has already, as previously said, it's, is previously sort of said it was okay for-profit entities to receive council funding, which, I think somebody lending money would sort of qualify for. There's some profit involved there. So yeah, I'll ask the question the way you presented it, Mary.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if members of the council or committee want to weigh in, please feel free to do so. And I'm by no means advocating for this, generally speaking. I just know that I've heard from some folks, and again, some of these are a case by case basis. And so if, again, I don't want to mislead or have folks believe that there could be some reimbursement and then, to have their hands tied, by any stretch. So thank you for looking into that.
So, Mary, I just have one last question for you, and kind of and Pat kind of maybe touched on this a little bit in a different way, but just we talked when did we do it's about kind of communicating with the 43 agencies or the 43 people. How are we doing with that? And like, can the committee help with that? Or have you been doing that? Or like, what's going on in terms of that contact that we talked about way back when?
Yeah, we did discuss that at the January council meeting, and I've had one-on-one conversations with folks, but have not had sort of a general outreach. When I reach out with this survey, which I intend to do tomorrow or Thursday at the very latest, that will be a sort of the first big timeline communication we've had. I would say I've communicated individually with about half of our grantees so far. But as part of that, I do want to ask, I believe at the full council meeting, we had discussed hosting sort of an informational session with the Program and Grants Committee. And I don't know if that's something that we're still interested in doing, or if that's something that, you would like me to just host and we don't have to necessarily do that during committee time. If we do have 3 or more of you together, it will be a committee meeting. But if we do want to do some sort of informational webinar, kind of for lack of a better term, I would be very open to that. And I think it could be very helpful, especially after folks receive, again, sort of the initial survey with that boilerplate language. I know we had discussed an opportunity for folks like we do with the SSPs to ask us questions so that we weren't having 43 individual conversations about the same thing. And that way council members, as well as myself, could learn a little bit more about the details of our contract. That's something that I would be very interested in and would love for the committee to do, potentially on the 11th. I think if we have an hour to do that, Joe, I'll sort of leave that up to you, but that's where things stand right now.
Thank you. Gordon.
It would be so helpful to have such a session and invite any of the 43 applicants. The value of hearing all of them hearing the same thing rather than a one-on-one conversation with you or me or Brendan is so valuable. And while it's already been 2 months since November, at least we're not so far out that it wouldn't be really appreciated to have this informational session on, well, how are we determining priorities, and what are the elements of this contract going to look like, and what about what do we mean by these state terms and conditions? I can't encourage you enough to do it, whether it's with you and one member of the council or the chair or Joe and Brendan, or whether you just bring in more of us and have to call it a public meeting. That doesn't matter to me.
Thanks, Gordon.
Bruce.
Yeah, and there are so many benefits to getting all of these folks together. I know when we get together for federal contracts and there are folks from all over the country, there are opportunities for collaboration. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen with all of these different contracts. And the only way for us to be able to collaborate is that we get to know each other and actually get to see each other. So I just see this as a win-win-win-win-win all the way around if we can get everybody together.
Fantastic. And the beauty of our committee meetings is they're recorded. So if folks can't join, they can have access to that, or we can send that out individually. Joe, I don't know if you want to weigh in on the timing of that, but you and I can potentially discuss that after this, and we can schedule a time. I think if we can do that within the next 2 weeks, I would certainly be ready to do that. And I know many of our grantees would be looking forward to that opportunity, as much as Bruce mentioned.
I think since this meeting is noticed, and as a grantee, if I got this notice, I'd be at the meeting. So I think if we can, even if we can say the meeting's going to happen at 3:00 on the 11th for 30 minutes, anyone who got money will be at that meeting, trust me. And to the question, this doesn't really belong here, but I'm going to say it, Brendan, your point about kind of contracts and back signing, like when you have a public audit like TOA does, it is really hard. When the auditors will not let us spend money outside of so that's I think that's also I'm saying that for if people are listening, because I think it's really something for people to think about when they're getting the money and when they can spend it based on their own sort of what their auditors say. So, but Liz, turn it over to you.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I agree. I think all this sounds great. And Mary, just one quick question for you in terms of because I love the idea of us having a connection, somebody who's either on program grants or the full council having a connection to a grantee. I'm wondering if you have a vision for what does that look like? Because it could be interesting for folks to know who their person is. that's gonna, like, when they come to the meeting in February, I'm sure between us all, we could figure that out between now and then, but I'm curious if you have like more thoughts about like what is our role there? Like we're answering questions or you're feeding us, we are on emails together so that we support them, or like what does that look like in your mind?
So I think I'm still trying to understand it a little bit, but the way I see it now is this webinar will be a great opportunity, again, for us to have an open conversation because I can almost promise you that the same contract questions will come up for each applicant. But I do envision, a world in which I communicate with each of the grantees, one-on-one with their specific information and introduce a council member as sort of the lead council member on their contract. And that when we have questions, that council member around certain aspects of the contract would sort of be the point person because you would be working really one-on-one with them to help craft those deliverables. And if you had questions, I'd ask that you include me. My hope is that to the extent we can, we keep most of the discussion as a full group, again, because I just think we're going to have a lot of the same questions. But I do see, each council member having at least some sort of direct communication with the grantees that they are sort of supporting and having a direct liaison position with.
Thank you.
I do want to mention, and this is more of a logistical question, if we do host a webinar during the Program and Grants Committee, I'm not completely certain we can have folks weigh in. So I just want to mention that, and we can potentially change the meeting time so that if we want folks to be able to ask questions, I don't think they can do that right now. So just something to note. And Joe, I'll work with Katrina and Grayson on that. Oh, or Grayson can
Go
chime
ahead,
in.
Grayson.
I was just gonna say, if people can like raise their hand as attendees, and if people raise their hand, we can promote them while they speak and then demote them when they're done, and it should be just fine.
Perfect. Thank you, Grayson.
Good.
So just to recap, next meeting, so probably 30 to 45 minutes would be this webinar. And then Mary will probably have to keep the trains going south or north. We'll want to probably keep talking about contracts, and you'll have sort of sent out the contract list and get our feedback. And there was one other thing that you had mentioned you wanted to do at the meeting. We covered a lot.
The low barrier shelters. So my ask is that I'll send out a individual
Right.
spreadsheet for all of you tomorrow with the materials from today's meeting. And my ask is that by Friday, the very latest Sunday, you all review the low barrier shelter applications. And I will say the PDF that I sent, that encompasses most of it. So you don't need all the attachments necessarily. Any questions you have for the low barrier shelters, please send them my way. I will get those questions out to them and then invite them to join part of the meeting. And Joe, you and I can talk about if it's the first part or the end of the meeting, and they can weigh in on any questions and just be on standby if needed.
And is Mary also going to have the final draft to go before the full council in regard to requesting funding?
The emergency oh, go ahead, Mary.
Well, I can make the edits that we discussed today. If there are additional edits to finalize it, I think that is a conversation the full committee needs to have, but I'm happy to propose sort of a final draft for the 11th. And that way any changes that would need to be made can be made in advance of the full council meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it'll be a jam-packed agenda, and it's good it'll happen before the council meeting. And people can anticipate getting some homework from Mary. And if we have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mary or I before the next meeting. And it's 5:03, so I think we're all set for today. But lively conversation, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks all.
Joe. Goodbye,
Goodbye.
everyone. Take care.
Thank you.